Mike Owens and Inside Fighting here, and it's always a pleasure to be joined by Luke Thomas. Luke, always a pleasure, my man. How are things with you today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you? Thank you for having me, by the way.
I'm very well. Thank you for giving me some of your time as always, although a little bit of a bone to pick with you as a Madrista. How are you feeling about the Trent Alexander-Arnold Liverpool Real Madrid saga? Is it a player that you want as a Real Madrid fan?
Yeah, Madrid needs some help. I don't think Ancelotti won the Champions League 6 months ago at this point,
Yep.
and I don't think he's going to make it this season. I don't. I just don't. I don't really. There's a lot of problems, and yes, yeah, that they need a lot more help than that.
Mm.
I'll just put it that way. You know what I mean? It'd be great, but you can't. There's a lot to do.
I'm not sure how much of Liverpool FC that you actually watch, but the big question about Trent is his defensive ability. Do you feel like he will get the same love and support from Real Madrid fans if he's making potential errors, let's say, in a defensive sense?
Depends how costly they are. I mean, the
Mm,
reality about this Madrid team, dude, if you look at it like up and down, especially with guys like Mendy and Vasquez, these guys make errors, man. It's not
mm,
they, especially Mendy. Mendy is again, he makes a few of them. But this is the Madrid team. Like, how many times have you seen Madrid? Oh, they go down 1-0, they go down 2-0, and then they claw back,
yeah.
in the late. It's not because everyone was locked in defensively from the word go. It's actually quite the opposite. It just happens a
Mm,
lot. So, again, depends how costly they are, but like as a rule, they care a lot more about your comeback than your errors typically.
yeah. Well, football aside, it's good to catch up. Obviously, got this big UFC card this Saturday, UFC 311, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan in the main event. I did a little bit of digging before we jumped on, and traditionally, the first January pay-per-view to start the year is generally considered a bit of a weaker card. I mean, when we look at Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland last year, we look at Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill at UFC 283 in January of 2023. Generally, it's a little bit of a weaker pay-per-view main event. What do you think the strength of this card compared to the traditionally first pay-per-views?
Strength of this card compares to, I won't say every card UFC's ever done, but
Mm,
I mean, this card, there's very little to complain about on this card.
mm,
It's not that every fight is amazing, or even the ones that we have identified ahead of time as relevant or potentially good. They could be duds too. You know how it goes.
mm,
Half of getting a good fight card is engineering, and another half is luck. And one can sometimes make up for the other. Sometimes they both fail on you. So the reality is, at least on the engineering side, I feel like UFC hit a home run with this one, and maybe even a little bit more. Just I've made this point on a couple places this week, dude. The main event is the number one pound for pound guy in the sport,
mm,
defending a title in a weight class most people recognize as, if not the best, certainly one of the best,
mm,
against the top contender in that division. Like, even if the rest of the card was completely terrible, which it is absolutely not, but let's just posit for a second that it was, I would make the argument to you whether it was MMA or boxing, it doesn't matter. You're talking about the best guy in the sport in a highly relevant competitive
mm,
contest. Stop everything else. That's where, to me, the conversation both begins and to an extent ends.
mm,
However, you're asking about the broader picture. You also have the bantamweight title, which is happening a little bit earlier than maybe it should have, but still a very competitive division with very good fighters. And then you have Jiri and, Jamahal. You have Renier de Ritter, Kevin Holland, and even the fight that's probably going the most unheralded on that main card between Moicano and Dariush is also still pretty good and very excellent, well matched.
mm.
Then there's Peyton Talbot on the prelims. I mean, I could go on and on about this. It's not that the card is perfect. No card is. Geez, man, you can
Yeah.
do a lot worse than this.
What's the one fight on the card that's standing out to you? Like, if you could only watch one fight live, which is the one that you feel like is most important?
I mean, I feel like the title fights kind of take that
Mm,
uh, by virtue of being title fights.
true.
It's going to be the main event.
Mm,
I could understand an answer for the co-main depending on what your preferences are. But it's got to be that main event. It's a rematch. They fought 6 years ago. There's been a lot of time for both of them to change and develop. In fact, I would encourage the viewers or the listeners here to go back and watch the first fight if you haven't, and pay attention. Arman Tsarukyan is obviously still in phenomenal shape in that fight, but he
mm,
wasn't quite as big and muscular
no.
as he is now.
Mm,
He's much bigger now, and he, by the way, being only, what is he, 27, 28 years old,
mm.
I don't know how much longer he's actually going to be able to make lightweight when you really look at it. But
Yeah.
okay, separate conversation. It's a rematch between them. The first one was not crazy in terms of being a brawl, but was very exciting, reasonably competitive, fun, great grappling on display. And I think both guys have gotten better, and they've gotten better in a way that leads you to believe it'll probably be this fight will have more dimensions to it than just the insane grappling that went
Mm.
back and forth in the first fight. So for all those reasons, plus, I mean, I'm not going to waste any more time. The stakes of the fight, yeah, it's got to be that one for me, man.
Who do you think has improved more from their first meeting? Like, if you look at version one, Islam Makhachev, version one, Arman Tsarukyan from that fight, and you look at, let's say, version two on Saturday night, who do you think has actually improved more skill for skill?
That's a tough one. I'll tell you my answer in this way. I think that Armin has made more overall progress in terms of what he was to what he is and how much distance he had to travel to get there. I think, certainly there are still issues with his game, in particular in the striking department, and a question of not whether he's in good shape, but even good fighters need to have some sense, unless you're like Merab. Merab is like
Mm.
a really very special case.
Yeah.
But even if you're in really excellent shape, and you're an experienced fighter, there is still something to be said for apportioning your offense correctly so that you don't have to dig deep in the. I mean, sometimes your opponent makes you and like your game plan goes out the window and what are you going to do? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where the fight is happening on a pace where you could manage it in such a way to not conserve resources, just not burn them all early. I
Mm.
think that's been a bit of an issue for Armin. But I'll say this, and this is kind of like just sort of tipping my hand to like where I think the fight's going to go. Armin is powerful, he's dangerous, and can very much win this fight, right? We're always talking about probabilities, never certainties. Nobody really knows. We're just doing our best to
Mm.
guess. But my sense of things is that while Armin has made up more distance,
Mm.
A, Islam improved during that time.
Mm.
And B, even if he didn't improve as much, he was already reasonably well ahead then, and I think still retains key advantages in key areas of the fight game:
Mm.
experience, defensive striking, counter grappling, submissions.
Mm.
I just feel like a lot of these areas he's still a step ahead. So Armin certainly come a long way. Has he come far enough is the question, and I guess we'll find out on Saturday.
There's a lot of mystique around the first fight because it was the first time Adriano Martin's fight, notwithstanding that Islam was actually challenged. I think it's the only time maybe the only time he's ever been taken down in his career, but it was certainly the first time he'd faced any real adversity in many ways. Having said that, when you watch that fight back, as you kind of encouraged the audience to do, it is 30-27 to Makhachev on most people's scorecards. I believe one judge scores the fight 29-28, but the other two judges see every round for Makhachev. So in some ways, still a lot of dominance from the now champion. I guess when you look at this from an Arman Tsarukyan perspective, what do you feel like you can take from the first fight and apply to this rematch?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what his game plan is. Remember, the first fight just 3 rounds. This one is
Mm.
five, so you have to kind of think about that too. I mean, the reality is this: when Armin wins, okay, their Beneil Dariush fight notwithstanding, how does he typically win? He typically wins on the ground, right? That's
Mm.
typically what he does. And for that reason, I feel like if the fight doesn't take place there for a long enough amount of time, whatever that is, I'll say this: the less time they spend on the ground, the more I think it favors Islam, right? I
Mm.
mean, I just there's Islam could submit him on the ground too. We've seen it. I mean, like he punched Oliveira when he was in the air and then head and arm triangled him on the
Mm.
ground. Of course, these are always in play, but you know what I mean? Like
Mm.
just ground for ground battle, ground versus ground. I feel like the longer they spend there, the better it will be for Armin. But the problem that Armin has, and this is why I've been a little bit hesitant, is not that he hasn't improved, but I want you to consider his grappling style. He's not as good as a lot of the Dagestani guys with pins and rides in order to create scenarios where someone is at least partly or mostly immobilized
Mm.
while having the opportunity to land significant ground and pound. And if you're wondering what I mean by that is consider the ways in which Habib, who's sort of like the apex
Mm.
predator version of this style,
Yeah.
consider what he would do. He would often split guys' legs. He would move to mount, but it was like a really, the mount was always centered on control. He would usually have the body pinned or turned or manipulated, and then in such a way where his legs and it just sometimes just his legs, but then sometimes a combination of a leg and a hand did enough control or immobilizing where he had a free hand to just rail on you.
Mm.
And he would. And of course, that could also be used to set up submissions in certain cases. But this is what I mean. It's an entire system of pinning, turning, and otherwise immobilizing combined with ground and pound. Tsarukyan's not great at that. If you go and look at the fight where he has like what we consider like maybe the most savage ground and pound, that's going to be the Joel Alvarez fight. And that's basically from top, and then he was on bottom and guard.
Yeah.
Dog, Islam's not going to be there for that.
Yeah,
Like, he's
that's true.
just like, no, unless you hurt him on the feet first, but like just wrestling for wrestling, you're never going to get that. He's never going to fight you in these positions. And so I'm like, well, where exactly is more of the offense going to come from? I think he's tightened some of this up, but to wrap it up, my general sense of trepidation for his chances revolves around this. He's gotten sharper, better entries, better timing, more well-rounded ability, certainly on the feet as well. But in terms of that immobilizing, pinning for ground and pound, I've not seen a ton of evidence of growth in that direction, and that concerns me.
If we take Arman out of the conversation for just a second, I've been catching up with a lot of lightweights at the moment. I caught up with Benil Dariush, Grant Dawson, and I've been asking them this question. I want to get your thoughts. Take an actual style out of for a moment. So imagine that you don't have somebody's style to work with. What would you feel would be the composite parts of a game plan in order to defeat a fighter like Islam Makhachev? What would you need to put in place to have success against that style?
Take what Tsarukyan has in terms of wrestling ability and turn it from offense to defense.
Okay.
So now he is forced to stand with you, or at least, largely forced to stand with you. You can break the clinch, you can separate, you have good footwork to circle away, all that kind of stuff. And then I think you just need a little more than that. I think you need good stand-up. So you need somebody who's got really fundamental skills in both I would say not fully the striking department. I mean, I realize Volkanovski got head kicked, but I think in general the reality is if you can put pressure on Islam and force him inside boxing range, which he'll do with you'll see that. But you can reasonably break clinches, get your back off the fence, stuff takedowns, down block, and whatnot. He's beatable. But like the question. People often, I've seen this over the years. I remember people being like, what's the exact style to beat John Jones? And what's the exact style to beat Cain Velasquez? And these are worthy questions of being asked. Please don't misunderstand me. But they always run headlong into, okay, now which of those guys is on the roster is that?
That was my next question.
And when a guy is number one, what you usually find is that there isn't a guy on the roster like that. And so maybe that's why they're number one.
Of course.
Know what I mean? Like that's how they got there, is because none of their peers can solve for that.
Would you give UFC featherweight champion Ilia Topuria a greater or lesser chance than Arman Tsarukyan of defeating Islam Makhachev?
That's a tough one, because Tsarukyan can certainly match Islam's physicality, and I think is a better overall scrambler. Not a better grappler, but scramble for scramble, I think that Tsarukyan is better. And so he presents challenges in ways that Topuria does not. But on the feet, I think Topuria is a much more dangerous threat. And I want to be clear, I think Topuria can wrestle too very well. Enough to do it and scramble. And here's the thing. Tsarukyan will fail on a takedown, but then he'll just scramble and then try again and then run you into the fence and then try again. Like, he can recover from a failed attempt pretty well and pretty physically, right? I don't feel like Topuria, relative to Tsarukyan, would be able to do that. That creates some problems should Islam get on top, which, by the way, Bryce Mitchell was able to take him down. It doesn't seem crazy to think that Islam could do it either. However, on the feet, I think if Islam is forced to stand with Topuria, let me think about before I say this, because every time I say something like this, it blows up and then people will yell at me. I think that over the course of 15 to 20 minutes, if a guy like Islam is forced to stand with Topuria for whatever reason, there's a good chance Topuria knocks him out. I think that this is what I mean. Like, imagine you could take Tsarukyan's wrestling on the defensive side and put it in the body of Topuria. That guy beats Islam.
Yeah.
That guy beats Islam.
Yeah.
But Topuria's a 45er. I mean, I know there's a whole how much weight is he losing, blah 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 thing, but you know what I mean? Like, that's the but you see that's what you would need something like that.
Yeah.
That guy would beat him.
So we need Ilia Topuria is what we need.
Yeah,
Essentially.
yeah.
Essentially.
It's insane to say because both those guys are really good, but like that together would be a winning combination.
Yeah, 100%. Segueing from one Georgian fighter to another Georgian fighter, co-main event, Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov. I had the pleasure of catching up with Merab's head coach, John Wood, earlier on in the week, and I asked him the question which I feel like most people want to know, and I think he's been asked this a couple of times as well, is Merab's emotional investment in this fight. And he was pretty clear to say Merab's an emotionally invested guy. He's emotionally invested in everything from sparring to everyday life. I guess my question to you is, he did admit, I should say, that there was an extra level of emotional investment than is not that is other fights. Will Merab's emotional investment in the Umar Nurmagomedov fight work for or against him on Saturday night?
It will likely work against him. There is certainly one interpretation that because he's got an extra level of motivation, that it will fuel him en route to the kind of, what would you call Merab? Death by 1,000 cuts, right? I mean, he's just constantly, each one is not so bad, although we're talking about takedowns and strikes and everything in between, but each offensive act is not so bad, but in totality, it just is overwhelming. There is certainly one interpretation where that kind of emotional baggage actually ends up being a bit of a buoy instead. And that is real. That is very real. That's the thing that you see it time to time, man. Like, if you might be like, oh, what's an example of that? Habib versus Conor. Dude, Habib was taunted. You could tell. I mean, he kind of played it cool, but you could tell he was a little bit on edge about it. And then it absolutely fueled his malice in that cage that night, and him jumping out like, dude, look what it did. Did that slow him down? Hell no, it didn't.
Yeah.
he went
Sped
to
him
work
up.
on McGregor. You know what I mean? So there's absolutely that kind of thing and we've seen it does happen. On the other hand, there's just been a nature of like Merab staying not focused. You know what I mean? Like, he just seems distracted by it all. And I know this is a guy who plays games and seems like he's playing the levels and all that way. That could be true, but I just feel like, and the other part is this, like, why has he been invested? Oh, so-and-so talked bad about him. But dude, a lot of opponents talked bad about Merab. He didn't have this reaction.
True. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is an unusual one. And I kind of feel like maybe some of the stuff he is saying that Umar got this a little early is both, fair criticism and maybe partly what's animating him. But I think the other part that's animating him is like, dude, like, you just became the champion. It took you for, a while to get there. It wasn't like you got fast-tracked like O'Malley. And then in your first fight, they're making you take it early against an undefeated Nurmagomedov brother who has a pretty good chance of winning. Like, your chance to make money is this. Your window to make money is this. You need to have the belt. And it is great. It might be grand opening, grand closing for his business of making money as an elite fighter. Like, think about how insane that is.
Yeah.
So I can understand why, like, why is both is a tough challenge, and I think he knows that. And then also, like, between just the circumstances he's in and everything else, it's kind of eating at him a little bit. The point I'm trying to make is that a success? Is that an ingredient for success? Can be. I tend to think that there are bigger forces in play that he recognizes as setting up his undoing, and I think it bothers him.
Yeah. Jiri Prochazka and Jamahal Hill square off in the featured fight, I should say. Both guys coming off title fight losses to Alex Pereira. So in many ways, in very similar situations, but also in many ways, very different situations. Who do you feel like has more on the line in this fight on Saturday night? Because both in some ways very close to title contention, both either guy with a loss seemingly very far away as well.
Well, let's just be clear. I mean, I'll answer your question, but a loss in either direction is really bad.
Yes.
Really bad. So you've got two guys who are former champs, and you're like, oh, all right, well, I mean, they're going to be top of the division forever. And it doesn't close the door completely. I think that would also be kind of silly to say.
Mm.
However, it would be bad. You have a guy in Yuri Prochazka. Remember, between the first and second Poatan fight, it got worse for him, not better. In
Mm.
fact, it got much worse for him
Yeah.
the second time out. So there's like a real degradation. And then he was wondering, do I need to drop weight classes and all this nonsense? And really had a sort of like a come to Jesus moment, as we say here in Los Estados Unidos. And then in the other case of Jamahal Hill, who former champion, but then had a terrible injury, kind of came back too early, and he got wrecked by Poatan as well. I know he disputes the nature of it, but it wasn't like, I mean, whatever you want to say that it was not a successful outing. And he's talked
Mm.
so much smack about getting back to Poatan, and then they had the incident at the UFC PI, and all the stuff like I'm going to show you what's up, because everything is kind of predicated on what he's doing about getting back to Poatan. It's a reuniting with Poatan. Well, what happens if Prochazka knocks him out?
Mm.
Where are you now? You're not even remotely in that conversation. I think it hastens Poatan's. I mean, he has obviously business with Ankalaev, but if he wins that, I think it hastens his exit from the division up to heavyweight at that point. For being honest, like Poatan has the fortune here of two guys he's finished, one guy twice. They have to battle each other. Like, it makes it so much harder for a previous contender to ever even get a shot again.
Mm.
You're asking who it's worse for. I think it might be more mentally damaging for Jiri, but if you're asking like whose career is more affected by it negatively, I'd probably say Hill.
Yes. Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
but I don't think you should sleep on what it would mean for Jiri, because the thing is this: Hill has angered the fan base. Jiri has captured the fan base, and there's a lot of like motivated reasoning in either direction because of this. But a loss for Jiri, dude, like that would be really bad. I mean, he might drop to 185, which I don't think is the right answer for
Mm.
him at all. I mean, he's been doing all of like these like living in dark rooms and shit, like to to like exercise whatever demons that he has. Like,
Mm.
what if none of that stuff works? Right now where are you? All this energy you put into like discovering yourself, it meant nothing in the end. That is damaging.
Mm.
Hill's stock would collapse because the fans would turn on him even more. They would like relish in his suffering, and I think it would just really push him back in the rankings to a degree where I don't even know what the relevant fight would be after that. So yeah, a lot to lose in either direction.
Yeah, 100%. Just one final topic I wanted to finish on, kind of aside from UFC 311, which is the news that broke yesterday. I think Ariel Helwani originally reported that Bellator is quote unquote dead. Obviously absolved or acquired by the PFL brand, but then now subsequently will be removed from as a formal franchise, let's say. We've heard a lot of noise out this week from PFL regarding use of elbows, regarding splitting the tournament prize from 1 million to $500,000. So just wanted to get your thoughts on the development around Bellator. We've also seen Patricio Pitbull, as of today, be asked for and be granted his release by Don Davis via Twitter. So just wanted to get your thoughts on the PFL Bellator situation and just your thoughts on that, really.
I mean, as somebody who was at Showtime when Bellator was there, it's my personal belief that the Bellator brand has been dead for a very long time.
Mm.
I don't think it died this year. I don't think it died the last year that it was on Showtime. I think that was a product that never recovered getting moved off of Paramount, previously Spike TV. And it couldn't, because the nature of how MMA is constructed. I mean, there's just a lot of really interesting blaming going around. Please do not misunderstand me. I am like everyone else who is watching this in the following sense. I hear Don Davis talk about all the things that he wants to do and change or whatever. Up until recently, there was good changes recently, which is the ones you're indicating.
Mm.
But up until then, you just hear him talking like, dude, what on earth? What on earth are you saying, bro? Like,
Mm.
none of this is in any way correct or interesting, or I'm not suggesting as much, but nobody ever wants to connect the dots. Dude, Bellator used to do well over 800,000 viewers on national television, and in certain cases over 1 million. By the way, when Kimbo Slice fought, they would do 3 million. What happened? The industry has contracted to such an extent that it's not even possible, in my opinion, for another mid-major in the United States and maybe even globally to succeed. Cage Warriors, Octagon, a lot of the European promotions
Mm.
are about the only exceptions to this rule. But like, I don't think one is going to survive. Bellator has not survived, and I'll just be honest with you, I don't find it likely that PFL will survive. I don't think anybody at this stage, at that level of the business, like what it takes to run it at that level, can make money doing this anymore. And I know everyone says, oh no, Don Davis is really bad at it. Guys, Oscar De La Hoya is a multimillionaire promoter in boxing. Do you think it's because he's very good at it?
Mm.
Mm, I don't think he's terrible at it. I don't think he's especially gifted at it either. It's because the regulatory structure in place allows for multi entities to promote relevant MMA. We live in a world where only one company is essentially, according to how the public views it anyway, putting on what they would consider to be relevant MMA. As long as that is the case, do I think it's good that they are sunsetting the Bellator brand that has been dead for a long time? Yes, of course I do. Do I think it's good that they are getting rid of the tournament in terms of the point system that they had? They're still going to do what we call Grand Prix. I guess they're going to call it something else. But you know, minimal tournaments in that sense.
Yeah.
Sure, I think that's fine. I think it's totally fine. I think these are great things, and cost cutting, while difficult, probably makes sense for their long term survival. So at least I understand it. This won't save them. It will not save them. They cannot be saved. And when you ask yourself, why can't they be saved? Yet people in boxing are making money who are so at it. You have to start asking the questions of, to what extent is UFC monopoly choking out the rest of the industry and leaving no room for any other player? That's where we are. So if you want to make fun of Don Davis's LinkedIn posts, believe me, I'll help you with the writing for that party. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
I completely get it. But even if they were making all of the other good choices, it would not matter. And I think that's a bigger conversation that we all have to have.
Yeah, there you have it. Luke, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I always look forward to and appreciate your time when we preview these cards. Thank you as always, and I wish you the continued success with all of your endeavors.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry, I made this dude wait because I was so busy and he waited. And so I thank you, my friend. Appreciate you.